The global economy has experienced 4 significant debt waves since the 1970s. There was the Latin American debt crisis of the 1980s, the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s, and the global financial crisis that sprung up in 2007.
Yesterday, Wall Street suffered its worst losses since just after 9/11. We are in the most serious financial crisis in generations.
As credit lines to developing countries were cut, Africa was brought to its knees following both domestic absorption and GDP declination, which led to an unavoidable recession. The history of debt in Africa is a long and painful one. Following 2 episodes of oil shocks in the 1980s, public finances of most developing countries deteriorated, leading to a lost decade of low growth, increased poverty, and political instability. African finance ministers meeting at the African Development Bank in 1987 began to seek possibilities of creating a trade finance institution aimed at better collective financing risk and becoming a vehicle for mobilizing international finance back into the continent. These discussions led to the birth of Afreximbank, a pan-African multilateral finance institution that could become the panacea to Africa's economic dilemma. Sitting at the helm of this institution 3 decades later is a man who can attest to its rudiments, having been a part of its foundational blocks. What many would describe as a highly accomplished and decorated professional with many accolades to his name, it is safe to say that Benedict Okey Oramah is riding on a wave's crest in a long-standing career. But what does he consider the greatest highlights and proudest moments of the last 30 years?
As the president of African Export-Import Bank, I will regard my day of greatest joy as that day when I received a report of a small project I commissioned. When I asked the department responsible for the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement area relations to check from the beginning of the AU, that is from the day AU was established till present, the key decisions that were taken to see whether there were any that will still be considered consistent with the mandate of the bank and the kind of things we are focusing on under our strategy. When I received that report, I became really fulfilled because I found that amongst the first decisions that were taken by the African leaders in 1963, the first meeting of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa, there were, I think, 4 key decisions they took there, the kind of things they wanted to do. They said they wanted to create a continental free trade area. They said they wanted to create what they called then a Pan-African Payment and Clearing Union. They also said they wanted to organize trade fairs amongst themselves. and said they wanted to deal with transit issues. And they also touched about some of the currencies that are technically attached to other currencies. When I looked at this and then saw what we had done, I then asked myself whether somehow God brought these decisions into our strategy without our knowing it. Because it turned out that Afreximbank has been instrumental in delivering all these things, that all the decisions that were taken more than 60 years ago. When I found this, I became really fulfilled. I then told myself that Afreximbank, if just for this, has delivered to its founding fathers.
A poignant realization born out of the will and fulfillment of age-long intentions, it is a worthy career highlight. But with this celebration also comes years of grit and bottlenecks.
We see stumbling blocks all the time. But for me, the greatest challenge I would say I confronted during my 9 years as president was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And why was it a big challenge? It was like, as we know, Black Swan event never ever happened. So much uncertainty. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody knew how it would affect people's lives. And we were all there with that uncertainty. For me, with my own experience, I knew that a shock of the nature that was about to emerge was going to threaten Africa severely. So in this case, I said this kind of shock would bring defaults, make it difficult for countries to import the basics, make it even difficult for countries to recover even after the whole pandemic had been contained. So my worry were, from the health perspective, how would Africa cope given the poor health infrastructure? So I was one of those who thought that it was going to be very devastating. The second was on the economic point of view. We are net importers of food. Countries were not going to be able to pay for what they had already imported, so they will not get new credit lines to buy food. And of course, the snowball effect on the economy. So this is the time that you have to show that those who decided to create you took the right decision.
The bank's first line of action was the creation of the Pan-African Trade Impact Medication Facility, launched in the first week of the pandemic, with the intention of cutting out trade debt payment defaults and a facilitation of credit lines to bolster importation and well-needed medical supplies across African countries.
At that time, if you're a small country, you couldn't even sit with vaccine manufacturers. They were only dealing with those who had volumes, who had money. And we had so many countries. We had island economies that they wouldn't even look at. So what we then did, working with the African Union under the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, was to create a structure that made it possible for us to do a pooled procurement of vaccine, and then we backed it up with a $2 billion, and that was the only reason that Johnson & Johnson was able to sit with us, members of the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, which was coordinated at that time by Mr. Strive Masiwa, to negotiate the 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine that we eventually bought. And that was the first time ever a pool procurement approach was used, which led to many other parts of the world coming to ask how we did it. And of course, after the COVID-19 pandemic, the African Union had adopted all those things, including the African Medical Supply Platform, the digital platform that the task team created that made it possible for us to manage this pool procurement approach, not only for vaccine, but also for COVID material.
Those supports were really very, very impactful. And even before then, there had been support in the area of Ebola, significant support to help African countries tackle the challenge that Ebola posed at that time. Then there was also support in South Africa for the effect of the cyclone, what was a major cyclone that took place in South Africa. So a lot of intervention, very impactful intervention in the area of health, and some of the disasters, were very valuable coming from Afreximbank.
Without the works of Professor Oramah during the COVID era and the leadership that he provided, it would have been a major problem for Nigeria to be able to solve. So we commend him, again, for the assistance he provided to our country during that period.
Navigating the unprecedented might have been one of the bank's most taxing efforts, but it would also turn out to be a well-needed preparation ground for addressing key healthcare lapses prevalent on the continent. Afreximbank signed a $1 billion presidential initiative to facilitate the healthcare sector in Nigeria, an objective that held a more close-to-home core.
Personally, the danger was brought home to me when I became very ill, very seriously ill. I nearly died in 2013. I must say that to some extent, I stayed alive first because the healthcare system in Egypt was able to try to stabilize me a bit, and then I was evacuated to King's College Hospital in London, where I was treated, and I spent literally the whole of 2013 in the hospital being treated. And on two occasions, I understand I almost passed on, but eventually I came out of it. Now, and I knew how much it cost to treat me. My recollection then was that it would be something almost going to almost $500,000. So I asked myself, if I wasn't in African Export-Import Bank, maybe if I wasn't living in Egypt to be first stabilized, if I didn't have the opportunity to go to the UK, if I didn't have a visa, and all that would have been a dead man. I wouldn't be here today. And as I came out of all of this, I asked God, I said, well, I know you will not come down from heaven to tell me why I stayed alive, but guide me to tell me why you gave me a second chance. And fortuitously, it turned out that the consultant, Professor Mufti, who was looking after me, there was somebody who came to visit me in the hospital, and he asked me who he was. I told him he was a doctor, but now a business person. So he mentioned, maybe we will talk to him about the project for the hospital we want to build in Africa. So it then struck me. I told him, you want to build hospital in Africa? He said, yes. I said, well, we have a plan to do that in the bank. Can we talk about it? He said, he told me a few things about the plan, and he told me, well, please just concentrate, recover first. When you recover, we'll talk about it. So when I recovered, we then started talking about it.
These discussions would lead to a medical initiative partnership with King's College Hospital to build a world-class medical facility on the continent. Following a tender bidding process across a few African countries, Nigeria was selected to host the hospital with support of the government on a 7-hectare land provision.
We expect the hospital to serve the continent, so medical tourism will come in there. The total investment will be about $700 million. I think the first phase of the hospital will open by around April, May next year. And for me, that day when it opens will be another important milestone for me, because it will be a dream come true.
From birthing dreams in the healthcare space to piloting Africa's trade and economic transformation agenda in the throes of a weakening multilateralism and a more pronounced deglobalization, there is undoubtedly a lot on the bank's plate. But a few initiatives stand out as milestones for Oramah.
I think the greatest initiative that Afreximbank has taken, which has impacted the continent, is the launch of the Intra-African Trade Initiative in 2016. We launched the Intra-African Trade Initiative in 2016, and when we then did our 5th strategy plan in 2017, we made it the arrowhead of our strategy. And the reason we took this approach was that we believed, and still believe, that the reason Africa is where it is today is because we do not trade amongst ourselves. So the Intra-African Trade Fair we launched it to begin to deal with this information problem. And we've done 3 fairs, and it's been extremely successful. In the aggregate, deals closed in those 3 fairs about $100 billion. Each fair attracts about 30,000 visitors. We have virtually all African countries having their pavilion there. We have transactions that have been closed, that have been implemented since we started in 2018.
Under this initiative was also the launch of the Pan-African Payment Settlement System, which seeks to harmonize trade standards and eliminate the bottlenecks attached to intra-African payments. But while harmonization is important, implementation is just as key, which led to the creation of the Africa Quality Assurance Center to build testing and certification centers across the continent. Next was the launch of the Africa Trade Gateway, an ecosystem of digital platforms that tackles the issues of trade information. From trade regulations to tariff concessions, this was a necessary point of ease.
It's expected that because of the drive and support that the African Continental Free Trade Area has been getting from Afreximbank, we are expecting to see intra-African trade rise to between 20-25% of total trade within the continent. So the impact has been amazing. And it's not just about payment system, it's also about developing investment capacity, particularly in the area of exports.
Nigeria has had this bad reputation of being the country that produces crude oil, yet being one of the highest importers of finished oil products. Without Afreximbank financing a lot of the traders, it would have been very difficult for Nigeria to be able to do that. And that has been very, very commendable. Even at the time when Nigeria was looking for foreign exchange to support his currency. You know, it was a transaction that Afreximbank led with the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC Limited, that provided a succor that the Nigerian naira required to survive the onslaught of the dollar currency.
What we did was to tell ourselves, okay, what are those things that are making intra-African trade difficult? We identified them and we selected the key ones that we can deal with, and we dealt with them. And I'm very, very pleased that for each and every one of them, either we've launched them, in fact, we've launched all of them. Some of them are at the early stages of operation, some have matured.
We saw the launch of the Global Africa movement. But what does Global Africa mean to you personally, and why now? Why is this an important time for it? And more importantly, what initiatives have you put in place to support this movement?
This is a very important subject, and it's something dear to my heart. Because what we have is, we are always in the minority, we are always fragmented, and because of that, we are always begging, we are always treated shabbily, without dignity. Global Africa is intended to change all of this. And we have the same cultural heritage. And with this youth population that we have, as Global Africa, we constitute a strong market that can consume our cultural products, our creative and cultural products. And we've done things about it as Afreximbank. The Global Africa Initiative is something we've taken head on to champion. But on top of that, we have expanded the membership of the bank to include the countries of the Caribbean. We now have 12 countries out of the 15 countries who have signed a partnership treaty, making it impossible for Afreximbank to operate there. We opened also our Caribbean office in Barbados. It's operating there already. We have started doing business. We never knew that the opportunities were as high as we quickly saw. Pipeline of about $2.5 billion. We've done transactions in the Bahamas, in Barbados, in Grenada, I think in St. Kitts, and with the transactions also being prepared in other countries. We also helped attract investment into some of those Caribbean economies.
The Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum is one of the byproducts of this process, having been hosted in Barbados, Guyana, and the Bahamas so far. Cairo, Egypt's largest city and regional North African power, is home to over 10 million people, one of the 7 wonders of the world, key historical attractions, and the headquarters of Afreximbank. It is also often considered the cultural capital of the Middle East, with a historically important film industry. The creative wealth inherent in the country and other parts of the continent is one the bank alongside Canex is showcasing in a quest to revolutionize African creative's perception on the global stage. An unusual playground for DFIs, but what is the key strategy around this initiative? And more importantly, how will progress be assessed?
We launched the Creative Africa Nexus. I think it was in 2021 that we started it. We launched with $500 million. Right now we raised it to $1 billion. And supporting the entire vertical of the creative industry. And in each of them, we have clear goals and clear activities that we are implementing. If you look at fashion, for example, apart from financing we are doing to support those who manufacture, we also support the creative element, people who are developing and who want to own their brands. We are supporting them. We also have a program whereby we've launched African designers into the main runways. So we've succeeded in putting African fashion on the global space. Some of them have received big orders from big brands. And we're encouraging them to own their brand. And that is why we've created a company called the Canex Creations Incorporated. And the job of this Canex Creations Incorporated is to use the venture fund our board has approved to enable companies to own their brand. And that is for the fashion, but it goes all the way to other intellectual property. We do not have big arenas where somebody like Burna Boy can come and about 15,000, 20,000 people can come and watch. You only have probably have in Egypt, in Kigali, in Rwanda, I think Senegal, to some extent South Africa, but nowhere else. So if you want them to do tours and make money as other musicians do, we have to build this infrastructure. And that is why we are supporting the development of arenas. So they will have two purposes. They will support what we are doing in the sports, but also support the musicians to monetize their talent. We are also, through the Canex Creations Incorporated, also taking copyright on music. That's working with some of the musicians to produce music and making sure that those rights are not taken away. And on the movie, the same thing. We've been financing movie production. We'll continue to do so. But we also, through our Canex Creations Incorporated, are offering the producers the opportunity not to sell their rights just because they want to raise money to produce the movie, but rather they can borrow and secure it with their intellectual property. So if they're able to repay their loan, they can take their rights. If they're not able, then our Canex Creations Incorporated will acquire those rights. The same thing on sports. We're doing a number of things on sports, helping to build arena, working with CAF to build stadium where games can be played, and also we build arena where basketball can be played and other activities can be done. We also working to make sure we create certain apparel, sports apparel brands, working with major entities on the continent.
Programs like Canex are aimed at enhancing global Africa's soft power, ensuring that African narratives and identities are represented and respected globally. But this doesn't fall far from the bank's wider mandate on all fronts.
He has taken Afreximbank from one level to another level, and higher returns, higher profits, higher revenues, higher pedigree, higher profile, more relevance around the world, touching lives and citizens of the whole of Africa, providing leadership in fund management and investment management and asset acquisition for so many African countries. We commend him and wish him well and many more years at Afreximbank.
Under Oramah's leadership, the institution has made impressive strides, including growing its assets and contingent liabilities from $5 billion in September 2015 when he assumed office to $31.1 billion by December 2022. Through recessions, COVID-19, food and energy insecurity, He says the aim to readjust the lens on Africa away from that of poverty, conflict, and fragility remain on the front burner. Abisola Owolawi for Arise News.